Welcome to Peninsula Seniors Out and About. We're at the Western Museum of Flight in Torrance. Let's go see what Cindy has for us today.
Welcome everyone to the Western Museum of Flight. I'm Cindy Macha, the director. I now have the privilege to introduce my brother, Pat Macha, aircraft wreck finder extraordinaire. In this season of renewal, it seems fitting to have a speaker who has done so much for so many people who are seeking closure and resolution for their lost loved ones. And today, he will concentrate on one segment of his continuing quest, which is air crewmen lost in the training missions during World War II. Ladies and gentlemen, Pat Macha.
Before I begin, I want to recognize a gentleman in the audience with his son, Seth Wolf, who is a pilot in his own renown, and his son, Ace. Seth's grandfather was a co-author of the story of the P-40s, and this was published in about the year 2000 in Wings magazine. Without this, I couldn't make the presentation today. I have the accident reports, I have news articles, but all the work that your grandfather did on this book, on this story, is outstanding. Long out of print, highly valuable. If you can ever get hold a copy, please do. More about what he brought, and that's what you see before me as we get going here. So what is a Tomahawk? Curtiss Wright built by the end of World War II 13,798 P-40s, but the Tomahawk is the earliest variant. The straight P-40 had two 50 caliber machine guns and two 30s. The P-40B added two additional 30 caliber guns. The P-40C was the same with minor changes. When you leave that line, then you go to the P-40D, and especially with the E, the Warhawk, those are the famous airplanes that went all the way to the end of the war. But the Tomahawk did fight in China with the Flying Tigers, the AVG. And later, the Flying Tigers had later versions of the Tomahawk. Now, the leader of the 57th Pursuit Group was Major Clayton Hughes. And his mission was to fly 25 P-40s from Windsor Locks, Connecticut, out to the West Coast, to Marchfield, then to McClellan Air Force Base, Army Air Base. Remember, the Army Air Corps went out of existence in June of 1941, and it became the Army Air Force. From McClellan, they were to fly to Medford, Oregon, participate in war games, and then return back the same route all the way to the East Coast. So it's a 25 airplane start out, but when they arrive at Marchfield, there's only 19 of them because of mechanical issues, radio issues, etc. And their path that they took was from Windsor Locks to Selfridge Field in Michigan. From there, they went down to Memphis. From Memphis, they went on down to El Paso, Texas. From El Paso, they went to Luke Army Air Base in Arizona, and then on to Marchfield. Now, they left October 24th of 41 on this long flight north. But when they arrived at March, they had 4 days to kind of get a little bit of R&R and recovery in. When they prepared to depart on October 24th, the weather did not look good along their flight route. And some of the men in the squadron asked Major Hughes if they should not stand down. And Major Hughes said, absolutely not. We will depart as scheduled at 11:30 hours, and you will follow me. He had elements in his flight. As they got up over Cajon Pass to head to Tehachapi Pass to cross into the Central Valley, things started to go south. For some reason, Major Hughes turned to the northeast. Lieutenant Frank Mears tried to radio him and say, Colonel, Major, where are you going? Why are you going that direction? But the radios in those days weren't very good. So what Mr. Hughes did was to take 8 airplanes and to go up Highway 395. This was not the scheduled route, and they made a forced landing in Smith Valley, Nevada at a dirt strip there. This is Major Clayton Hughes. He was a West Point graduate, and these are some of the men of the 57th. 3 of the men in the bottom row there, 2 on the outside, would both lose their lives in this flight. One of the men on the top row would crash his airplane, and another man on the bottom row would later bail out and manage to survive. So here's your echelon of P-40 Tomahawks. And here's the first accident. Second Lieutenant Ralph D. Matthews, when he came in at Smith Valley, he pranged the airplane. He was not injured. This is our Lieutenant Matthews. But his aircraft was a write-off. A second P-40 landing at Smith Valley, the pilot hit the brakes too hard and the prop stuck in the ground. And that was the end of that flight for that airplane. You could repair it, but as you know, you can't restart an engine after you've zinged a prop. So here's the part of the flight group that got lost in this process. Lieutenant Mears got over the Tehachapi Mountains, and he did get up the Central Valley. And remember, Hughes is east of the High Sierra. He's going up 395 all the way up to Smith Valley. So the first airplane to get in trouble is here at the bottom of the picture. And that airplane belonged to Lieutenant Pease. Then there's a cluster of 3 in Kings Canyon National Park and another one further up in the forests near Yosemite National Park. Second Lieutenant John H. Pease, a dashing figure. This man is still alive. He is 99 years old. He is sharp as a tack. When his son contacted me at Christmas, I said, "How's your dad doing?" He said, "You know, Pat, that guy hasn't changed a lick in 10 years. Now, John Pease, as he got up into that storm, he got into some very rough weather. He was at about 15,000 feet when he said, "Pat," and I interviewed Colonel Pease, and he said, "Pat, that my airplane, my engine was failing on me. Suddenly the prop stopped. There was smoke in the cockpit. I put the canopy back. I jumped. I pulled that D-ring, and down I came. I landed pretty hard, but I didn't hurt myself. My plane landed not too far from me." He said, "The next thing I did was to gather my parachute, and I saw a little stream heading south, and I started to follow that water course." So where he came down is in Kern County, in the southern end of the High Sierra, along Wild Rose Creek. In World War II, by the way, Colonel Pease used up 5 P-47s, a highly decorated P-47 pilot in the European theater of operations. All of his P-47s were heap big wheel. This is Colonel Pease at his retirement from the United States Air Force after 30 years of distinguished service. He was number 2 in the Air Defense Command at the Pentagon at the time of his retirement. Prior to that, he was a squadron commander of F-102s up there in Labrador. So I call him. When the wreck of Colonel Pease's airplane was found by a hiker going overland who happened to contact me because of my website, he said, "I found an airplane." I said, "Did you have a camera? Take any pictures?" "Oh, no." "Well, can you describe it to me?" And he said, "Well, it had olive drab paint. There was a 50 caliber machine gun and there was a 30 caliber machine gun, and it didn't look like anybody's ever been to this." And I said, and where was this? Wild Rose Creek. We're up in the southern High Sierra there. I was cutting trails between the PCT and another trail. I said, hot dog, we got it. We got Colonel Pease's airplane. So I have a guy that does nothing but find people for me, and in a day he said, Colonel Pease is alive and well. He's in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and he wants you to call him immediately. So when I called him, and I'm just going to do his voice as best I can, he said, Pat, listen, you listen to me now. I said, Colonel, can you tell me your story? He said, no, you wait a minute. He said, you know where that airplane is. You get your team up there and you get my B-4 bag. My B-4 bag has all my personals in it. I got a wristwatch in there. I got some other stuff. You get that B-4 bag and you get it to me, and you take your son up there with you, because he's a hiker. He's in good shape. I said, okay, Colonel, I thought we'll make every effort to do that. Can you tell me your story? And so he told about the bailout and that, and he said, I had the good fortune to find that cabin the first night, and I wrapped up in that parachute. I had no food. It was very cold. There was snow on the ground. And the next morning, I got up and kept following that creek, and it took me to Kennedy Meadows. And thank God, he said, in Kennedy Meadows, there was a family, the Willoughby family, man, his wife and daughter, and he staggers in there, and they save his life. He said, I'd never have made it. It's 25 miles from Kennedy down to 395. Out of food, out of water, you wouldn't do it, and temperatures were so low, and we didn't have the clothes, he said, to survive those temperatures either. So that they drove him down to Little Lake, and he made a phone call. And that ended his part of the story. But then he said to me, he said, now listen, I gave that little girl my parachute. You find that little girl and you get me my parachute back. And that is the truth. So we did get the team in there, and David Lane is here, who went in with my son and went in with John Pease's son. And the first thing we look for to verify a crash site, we've got to find the prefixes. We've got to find the dog tags of the airplane. So right away, we've got it right there with the prefix. And when you see that number right there, 87 dash, then you know you have a P-40. You don't know the version, but you've got a P-40. Here's a 50 caliber. There's some of that OD paint. There's the Allison V17-10 engine that produced 1,090 horsepower. The landing gear, which if you found that alone, you'd know it's a P-40, because the gear on the P-40 rotated and folded back into the wing. And you see a little red there, and people say, what's that about? Well, it's war game time, so these airplanes were sometimes painted with red crosses on the wings and fuselages. This is John Pease's son. Lives in Portland, Oregon, and my son on the other side. And he did proud for his dad. He's in good shape, got up there and did what his dad needed him to do. And just another shot of John Pease Jr. So that had a happy ending. John Pease is alive and well. And that airplane is up there in a remote location. We don't want to give out the numbers. We want to see that that site is preserved as it is. The next man to get into trouble on the flight was Lieutenant Jack West. And this is another man in the squadron that I had the privilege to interview. He became involved in Project Tomahawk, which we'll talk about later. So with Jack West, Second Lieutenant Jack West, I asked him about his experience. He said, I was at 17,000 feet. I'm in the clouds. I get into a spin. I'm losing it. The airplane is coming down. I realize I've got to get out. I put the canopy back. I'm struggling to get out. I'm standing on the instrument panel, and I push free and clear. I pull the D-ring. My airplane hits the ground very near me. I was only in the air a few seconds after the pop of that chute. I hit the ground. What a shock. He gathered that parachute and he stayed right there for the first day and night next to the wreckage of his aircraft. The next morning, he followed Roaring River down and he stumbled into a place called the Barton Lackey Cabin on Roaring River. You can see on this map a little bit of that trail there and a model of the P-40. There's the Barton Lackey Cabin. Now that's in the national park, so rangers in the summer were using that. They kept it stocked with wood and food. So when Jack got in there, the first thing he did was make a fire to get warm, because again, they don't have the closed snow on the ground. This is even higher than Lieutenant Pease's crash site location. That smoke didn't attract anybody on the first day, but the next day it did, because another pilot had bailed out nearby, Leonard Lydon. And when Len Lydon saw that smoke, he headed for that smoke. This is some of the wreckage of Jack West's airplane. Project Tomahawk went in to recover much of this, and later in the program you will find out more about Project Tomahawk. They went in by horseback. I had a broken ankle on this trip, but my son went in and many other members of our team. And some of this material was recovered for the reconstruction effort. And this is all still out there today, quite a bit of it. Not everything was removed. Pilot number 3 to go down is Leonard Lydon, first lieutenant. He gets into the same situation, in the clouds, can't see where he's going, losing it, icing up. He bails out, but he bails out and lands on high terrain. He doesn't see where his airplane goes. This is Leonard Lydon. So Len Lydon gets down there with Jack, and for the next, 7 days, they're stuck at the cabin. They use up all the food. They try walking out on 2 occasions. But they turn around both times and they get back to the cabin. But on that 7th day, they hear the drone of an airplane. Jack West, his airplane was right there, no mystery. Leonard Lydon's airplane has not been found to this day. So we still have 1 missing Tomahawk, and David Lane, who is in the audience here, has made several trips into Sequoia Kings Canyon to try to locate that crash site. He's going to go back again this summer. And we hope to know where Len Lydon's airplane actually rests. The savior in this was an Army B-18 Bolo bomber. 2 lieutenants and 2 observers on board. They saw the smoke of the fire at the Barton Lackey cabin. They circled and they dropped a streamer. And what you see here that Seth brought in is the actual streamers that were dropped, weighted streamers with message on it. So let's take a look at what that says there. The first time around, the B-18 pilots dropped a message that said, if you're in trouble, light another fire. So they lit another fire, and the bottom of the message said, if you know anything about the missing airplanes, light 2 more fires. And Jack West told me they lit a number of extra fires. And the next message goes ahead and says, stay right where you are because you're going to be rescued later today by a ground party. Jack West and Leonard Lydon were saved. They both went on to great careers, one with a tragic end. Jack was shot down over North Africa in World War II, was a prisoner of the Germans. He was at the same place where the Great Escape took place at, but was moved 2 weeks before it happened. He was actually involved in digging the tunnels. He survived the war. Len Lydon went on to fly the P-47, many combat missions in Europe. On May 8, 1945, he landed at a recently captured German airfield. He got out of his airplane, got into a Jeep, went off the field. Coming back on the field, the sentry said, "Halt!" and he didn't hear it, and he was shot dead. The fortunes of war. Lieutenant Richard Long. Now, this young man disappeared that same day, but the wreck of his airplane was not found until 1959, when two brothers, the Arnott brothers from Mountain View, California, cut the trail crossing the High Sierra and stumbled into his crash site at 11,200 feet above sea level. For every name in an accident report, there is a face. We need to be reminded of that. For losses, you read a name, that's one thing. See the face. The young man, well-educated, and a West Point graduate. I had the privilege to fly to that crash site during the Project Tomahawk recovery efforts. We went in by helicopter. The Park Service wanted all aircraft wreckage removed because to them it was junk, it was litter. So Project Remember said, we can't get it all, but we'll take things we can use. And at this site, the accident report said that Lieutenant Long's remains had been recovered, and we found out that that wasn't necessarily the case. There's a .50 caliber jammed into the ground right there. So he came in, died instantly, disoriented in the clouds, plunged into the ground. A yellow X had been applied to this wreckage in later years by the Civil Air Patrol. And they occasionally will still do that. It means don't report it, it's already known. You see the OD paint on this. Before we left, we made a memorial marker. And in that marker was a metal tube with a memorial statement honoring the service and sacrifice and loss of Lieutenant Richard Long. Now, my helicopter had a problem. We had a group that we were all flown in. We had none of our gear with us. And they were going to have to bring the gear in. And then the helicopter gets a chip warning light on the transmission. And at the time, I didn't realize how serious that was. So they fly everybody out. My son was with me. I was the last one to go. There wasn't room for me. So they came back and found me. But these guys, we learned the hard way, had no mountain experience. We didn't have GPS in those days, and we didn't have radios, but I did have a signal mirror. And I had to flash the mirror. That helicopter's going back and forth until he saw the light and he comes to me. And then the loadmaster says, I got to tell you right now, if the transmission fails, we're not going to make it because over this terrain we can't auto-rotate. But in my mind, I was totally confident we're going to make it. Hubris, right? And I'm looking out at the terrain you're seeing there, and if it had failed, I wouldn't be here right now. But happily, I made it. I got out at Red Fern Helispot, and what a moment. My son took that picture. Now, those guys went on back to Fresno, but they did have catastrophic failure. They went down on a chicken ranch in rolling hill country. They both survived with minor injuries, but they did some damage to that Hughes 500C helicopter. And that's them taking off. They put the doors back on, and they're departing to go to Fresno. The next aircraft to go down was flown by First Lieutenant William H. Burrell, West Point graduate, in P-40 39-200. Now, the Army, when they buy airplanes, and the Air Force, today when they buy airplanes, it's by the contract year, 1939. The Navy has a totally different system. So that's the 200th airplane ordered in 1939. We'll see later some bigger numbers on P-40Cs. This is Lieutenant Burrell. His death was related to vertigo. Flying in those clouds, he lost it. The airplane came screaming out of the overcast into the forest and left a hole in the ground. He died instantly and tragically. Right after his death and just after the war, family went in there and put in the top marker. The second marker was brought in by other family members in later years, in the 1970s. We never forget those whom we love. This is some of the wreckage at the Burrell site. Very little remains. Parts of the Allison engine, and that's it. Now, when you have airplanes missing, you have airplanes searching for those missing aircraft. And there was an Army PT-17 with 2 guys looking for these P-40s, and they go down. Now, happily, they make it with no injury. That's what a PT-17 looks like, and that's how it was painted in those years. High visibility trainer markings. Look at the numbers there. 41 is the year of the order of that airplane, 8,091. So wartime, we weren't at war yet, but we knew that was coming, and everything is ramping up. And you see those numbers zoom in 1941, up into the 30,000s. So here's that wreck of that airplane. It's still there today near Balch Camp. And there's still some of that old blue paint visible. At this point, we're getting ready for the second phase. Major Hughes flies his airplanes from Smith Valley over to McClellan Air Force Base, Army Air Base near Sacramento. Everybody else meets there. And then they depart for Medford. And again, there's discussions about weather, but they all make it to Medford. In Medford, though, the weather is going south. They're going to cut things short, and they're going to return back to McClellan. So here are 3 more aircraft that go down in the Bay Area. At this point, and I want to read this, quoting Lieutenant Mears, there was an open discussion among the fighter pilots concerning the advisability of continuing the flight when so many others, including airlines, had canceled out. But Hughes would have no other way. He said, "We are going as though to combat." Second Lieutenant Walt Radovich remarked, "Major, why in the world are you going to try to fly in this weather when everyone else is grounded?" Hughes replied, "Lieutenant Radovich, if we were at war, we would have to fly in such bad weather to stop any attack." Radovich asked, "How are you going to fight an enemy you can't see in the clouds?" Hughes was immovable. This was the plan, and they would go with it. The 13 P-40s were divided into 2 sections. Hughes would lead the first section of 6 because Lieutenant Mears, being a very experienced pilot, could lead the other section. And that actually broke down into 2. Now, before takeoff, we had one of these airplanes, the radio didn't work, and they had an airplane that the instrument lights didn't work, and the takeoff time was 3:30 in the afternoon, and you're at high latitude in October, and the sun goes down early, right? So the pilot with the bad panel, he goes off base, buys a flashlight. That saves his life. Because as they head south, it does get dark. They are socked in clouds. They are lost. At this point, Lieutenant Truax and Lieutenant Speckman are staying very close together. Lieutenant Radovich is following them but can barely keep them in sight. As they proceed south, tragically, Lieutenant Truax and Lieutenant Speckman, they crash into Bald Hill, right in Marin County. They're in formation, and both are instantly killed, one below the road and one above. It is socked in. Now, I had the privilege also to speak with Walt Radovich because he was following them, and he said, "It was so bad, Pat, and I couldn't see where I was going. I'm getting low on fuel now. I bailed out, and when I bailed out, I hit the horizontal stabilizer and shattered my leg. I landed very hard, but I was alive. My airplane came down fairly close to me." And this is a nice colorized photo of the Truax crash site. There's an Army guard with a rifle there, and you can see the tail upside down with the tail wheel sticking up. Parts still remain at both those sites today. So here's Walt Radovich flying a P-40C. Look at the numbers on his serial. 41, 13,392. Now that's big time production. Those orders are giant, and we haven't had December 7th yet. But we know it's coming. This is Walt Radovich. One heck of a guy. And that's where his airplane came down in Marin County, very near a highway. And that's Walt Radovich in the hospital, recovering. And he's got a smile. He's alive. Well, what happened to Colonel Hughes? I keep wanting to call him Colonel. Major Hughes. Let me read you this. He tells his group, I see the lights of Sacramento. We're going to land at McClellan. Follow me in. They land. He gets out of the airport, and let me read this for you, please. After the group commander taxied to the parking area near the Oakland Control Tower and shut down, a young man in civilian clothes met him. Hughes indignantly asked the man what he was doing on a military base out of uniform. The man replied this was not a military installation, but Oakland Municipal Airport. Hughes vehemently disagreed and said this must be McClellan, because that is where he intended to land. After a lively discussion, the civilian escorted the major to the base control tower and directed his attention to the sign that said, Oakland Municipal Airport, elevation 6 feet. November 2nd, 1941 was a bad day for the Army Air Force in California. On that same day, a B-17 with 9 men was flying from Reno, Nevada, over to McClellan. And as they were crossing the High Sierra, they encountered extreme turbulence. And the pilot realized the airplane was in danger of breaking up. And he told all the crewmen, chutes on, go aft to the jump door, jump on my signal. He stayed at the controls. As the men had gathered together, the airplane broke into 2 pieces. The men aft were all thrown out, all pulled the D-ring, all landed safely with minor injuries only in the El Dorado National Forest. The pilot struggled to free himself from the airplane but could not get out. And he was found stuck in the wreckage, stuck halfway out the window, trying to squeeze through. He was a hero pilot. First Lieutenant Leo Walker. I had a chance to interview a survivor of this accident. This is a B-17D. It's a shark tail, early model B-17. And that's the area in which the 17 came down in. It had no camouflage on this bird. She was all natural aluminum. That's an original photo there. Nothing burned in this accident, in this crash site. We had the accident report. We hiked to it. We found the markings still highly visible. But one of the most remarkable things about this story is I was able to interview Fred Procuri, who was one of the men who bailed out. And he said, Pat, when we got out of that airplane, I pulled my D-ring, the chute opened, it was dead silence. It was eerie beyond belief. And then I thought I heard the wings of angels. And I looked up and I saw a flight manual fluttering down next to me. He and all his 7 other friends, crewmen, they all made it. Again, just scratches, no broken bones. They were found pretty quickly because they're in a flat area of forest. I heard the question there, that they were able to walk out to a trail to a road and flag down. They got attention right away. But this airplane is in remarkable shape. It's protected by the Antiquities Act, the 50-year rule, so it must be left in situ. That's the way we like it. Amazing. You can see the old gun blister. You know, that early 17 had no turrets, and the waist gun had a teardrop sort of set up there. That's what you see, and a lot of 30 caliber guns and not only 350s. Look at those rubber tires. They had no tread in those old smooth rubber tires. There's a memorial plaque there on the wreck honoring the service and sacrifice of Lieutenant Walker. Now, Project Tomahawk comes into all this because in the late 1980s, Kent Lentz and Michael Fortner, who were operating right out of Torrance, Zamperini Field, they founded Project Tomahawk. They wanted to rebuild an early model P-40, and they wanted to have permission to go into the Sierra and recover wrecks, any place they could get parts and things that could be used in remanufacturing. And that's their logo, the Curtis Wright Historical Association. And I had the privilege to be involved with them and to serve as an honorary member of their board. Here it is, right here, Torrance. They really got the ball rolling. And there's an Allison engine with Kent on the left and Mike on the right. And what Kent had done was he had gone to Hawaii to recover 2 P-40s that had gone down over there, Tomahawks. This particular airplane had crash landed just before Pearl Harbor. It was in a hangar when the Japanese attacked, and then it was fixed up, put back into service, and in January, Lieutenant Ken Sprankle crashed it in the Koolau range, and regrettably, he was killed in that accident. But they went out there and recovered from the Koolau the P-40 Tomahawk wreckage and brought it back here to Torrance. They had a little reunion. Jack West on the left and Walt Radovich on the right. They were kicking in those days, and great men, comrades in arms. They were supporters of the Tomahawk rebuild project. So here we're back down at Jack West site, and we're packing out material using pack horses. There they are. That's about 18 miles in there. So people say, how can you use stuff like this? Well, you use material like this as a template to remanufacture, to make new what you need. And there's the start of it. And there she is coming along. Now, Mike Fortner regrettably lost his life and very sadly took his own life. And Kent ended up selling the project, and it was completed at Chino. The airplane, when finished, ended up going to an owner and then to Great Britain at the museum over there, but now the Collins Foundation has purchased it and brought it back home where it belongs. This airplane was restored down to the nth detail. That's an inertia starter crank. So if you don't have ground power, you go out, you put the crank in, and you do this until you get that going. They engage it, and that prop starts turning. You pull the crank and engage, and then you've got the airplane going. This airplane was perfectly restored. Look at the tail wheel, the smooth tire. This is a B model with the 230s in the wing. Very close to the end of the line. And here's just a little salute to Mike. He was a good man. His death was so sad. And now we have the Tomahawk that flies again. The Collins Foundation will not bring this airplane on their tour because it can't carry a passenger. They are bringing a P-40, but it's been modified to put a paying passenger on board. This airplane, there she is, and she wears the marks of the Pearl Harbor, of a Pearl Harbor airplane. 284, 39284. The true Tomahawk. I thank you for your kind attention. I know I probably missed a few things in the loop here, but I really appreciate you all coming out for this story. And when the Collins Foundation does come west, they are flying a P-40, but it's a later model. It's an E with a seat put in the back so they can sell the ride. But this airplane, they'll never do that to this. Those days we look at, back at that time, the war, we knew it was coming, all the war games, all the war games in progress, everything that was happening, all the manufacturing buildup. And there were accidents then too, and more accidents later, that's for sure, as we get into the Second World War. As far as people ask all the time about Major Hughes, I have the documentation where he was called in. He had to testify, tell his story. Apparently he was reassigned. He was not demoted, but he is dropped completely off the radar. I don't know that he ever flew again, and may have been assigned to some other desk job. But without his number, we can't track that down. People are looking into it. Okay. Betty says it's time for questions if there are any. The question is, when did we go in? The first visitation started in 1989, 90, 91, and those were the years when most of this was done. Nothing will be done, of course, with John Pease's airplane. That's going to be left in situ, and it's protected by the 50-year rule. And that was 2016 that we went into John Pease's airplane. But remember, Leonard Lydon's P-40 is still missing. And I'm counting on David Lane. David Lane is a retired Delta airline captain. He owned a B-26 Invader bomber until it flew him to the poorhouse. Dave, would you stand up, please? David Lane, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, Old Man Rogers, yes, and on his lead, we're going to get back in there, David, and you're going to find that thing. It is sad, though, for Old Man Rogers. He owned Rogers Helicopters. He lost 2 of his sons flying, and he was so heartbroken, he sold the business and never flew again. We were scheduled to fly into the hinterlands for another mission when the ranger came to the heli-spot and said, "You can go home." And we said, "Why is that?" "The helicopter coming to pick you up has crashed. The pilot has been killed." That sets you back a bit. Good question. What happened to the B-4 bag? Well, my son, Roger, Pease Jr. got it. They went through that wreckage. It's in a bramble and a tangle. They didn't find the bag. But they did bring back a few artifacts and, of course, plenty of photos. He was well pleased. And again, he is still kicking today. More power to him. How was Lieutenant Radovich found? That was easy. He came down right on the roadway in Marin County, and everybody saw that airplane hit and the sparks fly and that, so he was picked up immediately. But the boys on Bald Hill, that was a day or so before people heard the crash, but the clouds had to dissipate before they were recovered. What's next on our list? We've got a list 5 miles long, and that list includes aircraft from way back and even those in the modern era. So we were out on Wednesday in Imperial County because a man had contacted me about an A-4 Skyhawk crash site that he had been to, and he thought it was a Blue Angel flown by Lieutenant Commander Stu Powery. Now, I have been to 7 Blue Angel sites in their training area, and Lieutenant Commander Powery was killed during a loop, or what they call a dirty loop. The other 7 that we visited, all in one place, along a railroad track where they line up, they come in, they do the loop, and the airplane goes back into the ground. So F-11 Tigers, F-4 Phantoms, A-4 Skyhawks. Nothing more depressing than that. A lot of blue metal, blue and gold. There's no fire, it's high-speed impact, the fuel vaporizes. So Powery was not flying in that area. I knew that. So this guy, he's a retired guy, he's kind of up in years. So he gave us these directions. We get out there, we're trying to figure them out. He said, there's a building and there's a green water tank, and you go east of that water tank. Well, we see a tan building in one place, and we see an old derelict place you wouldn't want to go near if anybody was there. Burned out vehicles and stuff now. So we hiked all around. We had 2 4-wheel drive vehicles. And we crossed the road, and I knew there was an F-8 Crusader near this site because I had been to it. And F-8s are real easy. CV, Chance Vought, and you have the prefix numbers. And a lot of white metal. Well, the Park Service asked me to take them to that site. I wish I hadn't. Anza Borrego. And we identified the site because in going back, we found that it was cleaned up. Probably in a cleanup kind of activity. So we're up going to the shed now, hoping that will, or this building, and we're saying there's no water tank, so I get on the radio and I tell Tom Maloney, come on back, Tom, we're wasting our time. We need more data on this. So we come back, we retreat, and by the way, we did visit another site on that day. That was a Marine AD-5 Skyraider that had gone down in 1956 with 2 men out of El Toro. There was a young enlisted man who had never flown before, and this guy said, I'll take you. And they jump in this AD-5, sitting side by side, and witnesses saw them come over Ranchita right above Borrego Springs and plunge. There's a big drop off there. Plunge down into the desert, but the dive brakes on the airplane had been wired shut. Now, the pilot was allegedly told this, but he couldn't extend the dive brakes. He pulled up, stalled, and boom, that was it. And that killed 2 men, a very localized area there. Blue metal, because they were still painting them blue in those days. So we always take the flag. We always have the Project Remembrance Team patch. We take a moment to read the names to honor their service and sacrifice. So that's sort of what a day is like for us. Now I get home and I call this retired guy and I said, we went to your coordinates. They were south of the highway. The building is north. What's going on here? And we saw no water tank. And then he says, oh, it's not really a water tank. It's kind of 3 feet tall. It's a trough. Well, thank you. No. So if I hadn't called Tom Maloney back, we'd have had it. Now we're going back out next Wednesday. And we're going to check this out. I need to know what airplane that is. Is that Stu Powery's A4E, or is that material possibly from the scatter of the F-8? I have been to more than 800 crash sites, mostly in remote locations. The number grows. It's way leads on to way, but it's all, aviation accidents are part of aerospace history. And it's not just the airplane that we're focused on, it's the people involved. To tell their story, to document their story. My archive in Mission Viejo takes up one whole section of a 3-car garage. There are many people in this room that have been there. It's all California. I used to do stuff for other states. I've been elsewhere. I gave all that to somebody else. I got my hands full right here. In California today, there are 3 other missing aircraft besides the P-40. There is the T-33 flown by Lieutenant David Steves, who punched out in 1956. He survived more than 50 days in the wilderness before he was rescued. And when he was rescued, he was initially, people said, you couldn't possibly have survived. You couldn't possibly have done this. He had a big beard. He had lost 60 pounds. He was found crawling on his hands and knees over Bishop Pass in June when the first pack train came in. He survived because he too found a cabin like the Barton Lackey. It had food and firewood. He ate everything in there. But he got in a little trouble for something else. He had a non-regulation pistol with him. And he shot a deer. He was an outdoorsman. And he ate that venison. So he was accused, never formally, but people said, hey, you staged this. It's a publicity stunt. You flew the airplane to Mexico because they've got T-33s. You had an illegal gun. You shouldn't have had this. By the way, you know what the Air Force did because of Steve's? They started in survival training at Stead Air Force, mountain and desert, and they started jungle training, survival in Florida, water and jungle at Homestead because of the Steve's thing. But he resigned his commission. His wife found out that he had had an affair. He died a young man in the early 60s. He was flight testing a modified Stinson Reliant in Idaho, pulling up. The wing came off, and that was all she wrote. Once again, thanks so much. But I want to say that David Lane has been looking for another airplane, a Piper PA-28 with 3 people on board, Oakland to Ogden, Utah. Dave has been up there how many summers, Dave? 6 times. And thanks to the work of Dr. Arpad Voss, who has developed a sensing system that, and you can do the little story on that, see his TED Talk. But it senses decaying DNA, bones, and he has a plume for that family in a certain area of Yosemite, and that's where David's been going into. And we hope for the sake of the family, for their closure, that this will work. The Arpad Voss system has been used by law enforcement. I don't understand it. It's beyond me completely. The other airplane is a light plane. Is that a Cessna 210? Yeah, 210, probably west of Lake Tahoe, that crashed into the Granite Chief, and 1 man on board. The question is there special training for flying over the Sierras? Well, people should be mindful of the Sierra wave effect. That can get you in clear weather as well as in storms. And what's his name? Steve Fawcett. That's a Sierra wave issue on that. But anytime you're around mountain flying, yes, special training. If you're a GA pilot, you should have special instruction on how to manage that. A light aircraft in turbulence or in those winds, definitely got to be mindful at all times. No, they had no radar. They couldn't see ahead of themselves. Just trying to stay on the instruments, to be instrument trained and stay glued to the instruments. And that one young guy that got the flashlight, saved his life coming down, he landed there at Oakland too, only because he had a flashlight. And he said, without that flashlight, I wouldn't have made it. Well, thank you so much. And thank you, Seth. These are the real deal.
Thank you for watching Peninsula Seniors Out and About. I'm Betty Wheaton. See you next time.